From the sands of the ancient world, long before cities grew tall or kingdoms rose against kingdoms, there lived a woman whose life was shaped by waiting, hoping, breaking, and believing again. Her name was Sarah, the wife of Abraham, one of the most important men in the history of faith. But before the promise of a child, before the birth of Isaac, before the jealousy, the pain, the wilderness, and the tears, there was a journey, a human journey, a journey of longing. And at the center of this journey stands another woman, Hagar, an Egyptian servant whose story has been whispered across generations. She was not born into power. She was not born into promise. But her life would become a testimony of something quiet yet powerful, that God sees. This introduction begins far before Hagar appears. It begins with Sarah's silence, her empty arms, her heartbreak. Sarah carried a promise, a beautiful promise, spoken by God Himself. A promise that she would become the mother of nations. A promise that kings and leaders would come from her. But promises sometimes feel heavier when years pass without change. Sarah waited and waited and waited. Every morning, she woke up hoping this would be the day she felt life growing inside her, the day the promise would start to bloom. But months turned into years, and years turned into decades. The young woman who once dreamed of cradling her own child slowly grew older. Lines formed on her face, her hair streaked with silver. Her voice changed from excited hope to quiet acceptance. She loved Abraham deeply, yet every smile he gave her reminded her of the future she had not given him. She felt it, that invisible pressure, that quiet question in her heart. Why not me? She knew Abraham believed God's promise, and she believed too. But believing is sometimes hardest when your hands remain empty. Abraham tried to reassure her. He prayed with her. He held her. He reminded her that God had never broken a promise. But the nights were long, and the silence between them sometimes grew heavy. God had said Abraham would have many descendants, but God had not yet spoken about how. Sarah began to wonder. Perhaps the promise was real, but perhaps she was not part of it. That thought pierced her heart like a quiet blade. She wanted to believe, but believing is not always easy. And as the years slipped away, her hope thinned until it felt like a thread stretched to. Oh, tight did I end their time. A woman without children carried a heavy burden. People whispered. They made assumptions. They judged her worth based on something she could not control. Sarah felt every whisper. She saw every stare. She felt like a vessel expected to carry life, but remained empty. Still, she managed her home. She welcomed travelers. She respected Abraham. She lived honorably. But inside her heart, a quiet storm was forming. Meanwhile, Abraham continued to lead his household with faith. He moved when God said move. He trusted when God said trust. But even he did not know how God would fulfill his promise. And that mystery sat in them like a shadow. This is where Hagar enters the story, though quietly and without ceremony. She was Egyptian, likely brought into the household during Abraham and Sarah's time in Egypt. She was young, she was strong, she was observant, and she served faithfully. She watched Sarah closely. She respected her. She cared for her needs. She heard the whispers about the promise of a child. She saw the weight Sarah carried. But Hagar had no idea, absolutely no idea, that her life would one day become tied to a promise she did not ask for, that she would carry a child who would change history, that she would face wilderness, fear, and revelation, that God would meet her in a desert and speak to her directly, something rare and powerful. But for now, she was simply a servant in a household full of hope, tension, and unanswered questions. One day, after years and years of hoping, Sarah made a decision that would shape the destiny of nations. A decision born not out of hatred, but out of desperation. She looked at her life. She looked at Abraham. She looked at the promise. And she said words that would change the future. Maybe the Lord will give me children through someone else. Those words were heavy, painful, and filled with the sorrow of a woman who felt she had failed. She chose Hagar, not because Hagar did anything wrong, but because she was there, young, healthy, capable of carrying a child. Sarah thought she was giving Abraham a solution, but she did not realize she was opening the door to emotional wounds that would follow them for years. Abraham listened. He hesitated, but Sarah insisted, and Abraham agreed. This was not God's instruction. It was human effort trying to fix divine timing. Before Sarah told Hagar anything, she watched her silently. She studied her. She wondered if this was the right choice. But Sarah was tired of waiting. Her heart was weary. Her hope was thin. Hagar moved through her tasks, unaware that her life was about to change forever. She did not know that her body would soon carry a child who would shape nations. She did not know she would face hardship and blessing in the same breath. For now, she was simply Hagar, faithful, obedient, and ordinary. Sarah felt trapped between God's promise and her reality. She believed God could do the impossible, but she also felt the weight of time pressing against her. Women her age were not supposed to dream of pregnancy. Everyone she knew accepted this. Everyone except Sarah, because God had promised her something more. But that promise felt distant, silent, hidden behind years of waiting. So she tried to solve the problem herself, not out of rebellion, but out of exhaustion. She thought, maybe this is what God wants. Maybe the promise will still be fulfilled, just not through me. Her voice trembled as she shared her idea with Abraham. He listened quietly, his face troubled. He loved Sarah, but he knew her pain was deep. He did not want another woman, but he also did not want Sarah to suffer anymore. After a long silence, he agreed. That moment sealed the path ahead. The day Sarah called Hagar to her tent was unlike any other. Hagar entered, humble, obedient, unaware. She bowed slightly, waiting for instructions, as she always did. But the look on Sarah's face was different. There was a mixture of pain, fear, and something else. Resolution. Sarah explained the plan with careful words. She said Abraham would take Hagar as a wife, and that any child born from her would belong to Sarah. Hagar did not argue. She did not fully understand. She simply obeyed, because that was her role. Her life was not her own. Her choices were limited. But in that moment, something invisible shifted around her. She was no longer just a servant. She was Sarah pretended to be strong. She couldn't show her heartbreak, not to Abraham, not to Hagar, not to herself. But inside, she felt like her heart was being torn in two. By giving Hagar to Abraham, she was opening a door she wished didn't exist. No woman wanted to share her husband. No wife wanted to feel replaced. But Sarah was desperate to see the promise fulfilled. Hagar, on the other hand, felt confusion. She respected Sarah deeply, but she also felt fear. This was not love. This was duty, and she did not have the power to refuse. Their eyes met for a brief moment. Two women connected by circumstance, but divided by position, pain, and fate. About to become part of a story far bigger than she could imagine. Life outside continued as usual. Servants prepared meals. Children played. Animals grazed. Abraham's household moved forward with its daily rhythm. But inside the tents, everything was changing slowly, quietly. Whispers spread among the women. They noticed Sarah's restless behavior. They noticed Hagar's sudden importance. They wondered what this would mean for the future. Some felt pity for Sarah. Others looked at Hagar with curiosity. But no one truly understood what God was about to unfold. Abraham was a man of great faith, but he was also human. He knew God had promised him descendants. He knew the waiting had been long, and he knew Sarah's idea came from pain, not pride. So he accepted her decision with a heavy heart, not because he lost faith, but because he hoped this would bring peace to his wife. The fire crackled before him as he thought about what was coming. He trusted God. But he also knew that human choices sometimes carried consequences. He prayed for guidance. He prayed for Sarah's comfort. He prayed for Hagar, who was now part of God's unfolding plan. But the night remained silent. As the days passed, the relationship between Sarah and Hagar changed. Sarah tried to treat Hagar fairly, but Hagar sensed the tension. She felt Sarah's eyes on her, not unkind, but heavy. She began to wonder why she had been chosen. She wondered what Sarah truly felt. She wondered if Abraham agreed to this willingly. The household felt the tension, though no one spoke of it. Change was coming, and everyone felt it. Morning came softly, but the weight on Sarah's heart did not change. She breathed slowly, knowing the decision she was about to finalize would shape the rest of her life. It was not what she wanted, but she no longer believed the impossible could happen through her. Deep inside, she still loved Abraham. She still believed in God, but her hope had been stretched thin like old fabric, ready to tear. As the sun rose, Sarah stood. Her eyes were tired. Her heart felt heavy, but her mind was set. She stepped out of the tent and looked toward Abraham. He stood near the livestock, giving instructions to the herdsman, strong, steady, faithful. Sarah whispered to herself, "This is the only way." She believed she was helping him. She believed she was helping God's promise. But she did not yet see the emotional storm his decision would bring. Abraham listened carefully as Sarah explained everything again. Her voice cracked, but she continued. She told him she believed Hagar could carry the child meant for their future. She told him she wanted him to agree, not out of desire, but out of obedience to what she believed was right. Abraham sighed deeply. He respected Sarah more than anyone. He trusted her judgment. He knew this was not easy for her. So he agreed, slowly, reluctantly, with a sadness in his eyes. He reached out and held her hand. They sat together in silence, two people trying to balance faith with fear. Neither of them knew how complicated this choice would become. Before anything happened, Hagar lived a simple life. Her days were predictable. She worked hard, served faithfully, and respected her place in the household. She admired Sarah. She saw Abraham as a man of honor. She did not seek power. She did not seek special attention. Hagar's life was steady, ordinary, safe, but destiny was already moving toward her like a quiet shadow. Hagar had no idea she was about to carry a child who would become a leader, a nation, and a legacy. She had no idea she would one day stand face to face with God in the wilderness. She had no idea her tears would become part of a divine encounter. For now, she was simply Hagar, living her ordinary life on the edge of a story she did not yet understand. Even after the decision was made, Sarah wrestled with her heart. Part of her felt this was the only solution. Another part felt she was stepping into dangerous emotional territory. She thought about Hagar, her youth, her beauty, her strength, her ability to bear children, and a quiet jealousy began to grow. She had not asked for it, but it appeared anyway. Sarah knew giving Hagar to Abraham meant watching another woman experience what she had longed for her entire life. Yet she believed she had no choice. She thought, if this is what it takes to fulfill the promise, then I must endure it. But endurance does not remove pain. And as the days passed, Sarah's heart grew heavier. Abraham trusted God, but even he felt uncertain. He wondered, was this truly God's plan? Would Sarah be able to bear this emotionally? Would Hagar understand her role? Would the household remain peaceful? He prayed deeply, asking God for clarity, but the heavens remained quiet. Sometimes faith is not built on answers. It is built during silence. Abraham returned to the camp with a heart full of questions, but with trust still alive inside word began to spread, not through gossip, but through observation. Hagar visited Sarah's tent more often. Sarah walked with a troubled expression. Abraham seemed quieter, more thoughtful. Servants exchanged glances. They sensed the tension. They felt the emotional weight in the air. A household that once moved like a smooth, unified rhythm now felt divided by an invisible line. Everyone waited. Everyone wondered. Change was coming, and it was coming quickly. Sarah watched Hagar more closely as the days passed. She noticed her strength. She noticed her youth. She noticed the way others respected her. She also noticed something painful, the possibility that Hagar could do what she could not. Even though this was Sarah's own plan, it still hurt. It hurt deeply. Sarah was not an unkind woman. Her heart was simply tired. And tired hearts do not always make perfect decisions. The emotional distance between the two women grew quietly, like a shadow following them. Hagar still served faithfully, but she sensed something was changing. She sensed Sarah's struggle. She sensed Abraham's silence. She knew something was coming, but she did not know what. Silence can say more than words. That night, Abraham sat outside the tent looking at the stars. The same stars God had once used to promise him countless descendants. But how would those descendants come? Through Sarah? Through Hagar? Through both? He wondered if choosing Hagar was truly the right path. Inside the tent, Sarah sat alone. She thought about the life she had imagined. She thought about the child she still wished she could carry. She thought about the cost of the decision she had made. She whispered softly, "Lord, am I doing the right thing?" There was no answer, only silence. And yet, despite the silence, the story continued moving forward. Step by step, heart by heart. The next morning, Sarah made her final choice. The waiting had become too difficult. The ache inside her chest had become too heavy. And she believed this was the only way to help fulfill God's promise. So she walked toward Hagar with steady steps. Hagar looked up, surprised by Sarah's presence so early. But she stood and bowed respectfully. "Come with me," Sarah said softly. Her voice was calm, but inside her heart was trembling. They entered Sarah's tent, a private place, away from curious E. Yes, where destinies would shift quietly. Sarah spoke slowly, choosing her words as one chooses stones when building a fragile wall. "Hagar, I need you to do so. Meeting for me." Hagar listened, confused. Sarah continued, "You know God has promised Abraham a child, a great child, a child that will begin a nation, but I cannot give him that." Her voice cracked slightly. Hagar felt her heart soften. She respected Sarah, and seeing her pain made her feel compassion. Then Sarah said the words that would change the course of history. "I want you to be Abraham's wife, and I want you to carry the child I cannot." The air in the tent felt heavier, as if time itself paused. Hagar did not know what to say. She did not feel ready. She did not feel worthy, but she also did not have the freedom to refuse. In that single moment, her identity shifted, her future shifted, her destiny shifted. Sarah waited for her response, trying to remain strong. Hagar bowed her head and accepted. After Sarah made the decision official, she felt a strange mixture of relief, sadness, and resignation. She believed she had done the right thing, yet her heart felt bruised. Hagar stepped outside the tent, her mind spinning. She had just been given a role she did not expect, a role she did not ask for. She wondered, would Abraham accept her? Would Sarah resent her? Would this bring blessing or danger? But she had little time to dwell on her fear. Faye moved forward, and soon Sarah would tell Abraham it was time. Abraham agreed, but his face showed a deep concern for Sarah's well-being. He did not approach Hagar with romance. This was not a love story. It was duty. It was obedience. It was a choice wrapped in sorrow and hope. Hagar felt nervous. Abraham treated her kindly, but the weight of becoming part of the promise felt enormous. Hagar stepped into a future she did not choose, and Abraham stepped into a chapter he did not fully understand. The union between Abraham and Hagar was not a celebration. There were no drums, no singing, no joyful dancing or feasting. It was solemn. It was quiet. It was heavy. Abraham approached Hagar with kindness, not desire. He understood this was not a choice Hagar made for herself. He spoke to her softly. as one speaks to someone stepping into unknown waters. "You are part of our family now," he said gently. Hagar's heart beat quickly. She bowed her head, accepting the role given to her. Outside the tent, Sarah watched. She hid behind the cloth entrance, her heart tight with emotions she couldn't name. She told herself she was strong. She told herself she could handle this. She told herself this was God's will. But deep inside, she felt something begin to crack. Not hatred, not anger, just a slow, painful sense of loss. Everything felt different after that day. Hagar noticed the stares. Some were kind, some were sharp, some were confused. She was no longer just a servant. She was now someone carrying part of the promise for Abraham's family. The atmosphere shifted. Servants stepped aside when she passed. They whispered softly when she entered a room. Sarah's authority remained strong. But now there was another woman tied to Abraham in a way no servant had ever been. Hagar tried to keep her head down. She continued her duties. She tried not to draw attention to herself. But Ng does not stay quiet forever. Did a tea first. Sarah tried to feel relieved. She told herself, "This is good. This is right. This is the solution." But when the tent grew quiet at night, and she lay alone with her thoughts, the truth washed over her like cold water. She felt replaced. She felt empty. She felt uncertain. She didn't resent Abraham. She had given him permission. She loved him enough to let him have what she thought she never could. But she didn't yet understand something important. You cannot give away a piece of your heart and expect it not to hurt. The decision looked logical on the outside, but on the inside, it was tearing her apart. Weeks passed, then months, and one quiet morning, Hagar felt a strange heaviness in her body, a change she could not ignore. She paused in the middle of her work, set down the water jar, and placed a hand over her stomach. Something was different. Something was new. Something was alive. She was carrying Abraham's child. A mix of emotions flooded her. Fear, surprise, pride, uncertainty. She knew this child was important. She knew this child was part of a promise greater than her understanding. For the first time in her life, Hagar felt seen, not just as a servant, but as someone chosen for a purpose. But with this pride came a growing confidence. A confidence that would soon lead to conflict. Pregnancy changed Hagar. She was still obedient, still respectful, still hardworking, but something inside her lifted. She was carrying Abraham's child. She felt important. She felt valued. She felt elevated above her old position. Some of the servants noticed she stood straighter and answered with more certainty. Sarah noticed too. Every slight shift in Hagar's behavior reminded Sarah of what she didn't have. Sarah began to feel invisible in her own household. She began to feel replaced. The distance between the two women widened. Not with shooting, not with arguments, just with silent, simmering emotion. As Hagar's stomach grew, so did Sarah's sadness. Every time she saw Hagar, glowing from pregnancy, smiling at her growing belly, receiving attention from others, Sarah felt another crack in her heart. She thought she could handle it. She thought she was strong enough. She thought she was prepared. But no woman can easily watch another woman carry the child she has prayed for her entire life. Sarah began to avoid Hagar. She began to speak less. She began to wake up with a heaviness in her chest. Inside her heart, a quiet storm began to form. This storm would soon lead to conflict, and the conflict would lead Hagar into the wilderness, straight into a life-changing encounter with God. But for now, the tension grew slowly, quietly, painfully. Abraham noticed everything. He saw Sarah's sadness. He saw Hagar's new confidence. He saw the tension building between them. He tried to reassure Sarah, "You are still my wife. You are still part of the promise." But his words felt thin compared to the reality Sarah was facing daily. And he tried to be kind to Hagar, but he also tried not to show any favoritism. Abraham was caught between two hurting women. one wounded by emptiness, the other lifted by new purpose. He carried the weight of the promise, but also the weight of human emotion. It was not an easy burden to bear. Abraham noticed everything. He saw Sarah's sadness. He saw Hagar's new confidence. He saw the tension building between them. He tried to reassure Sarah, "You are still my wife. You are still part of the promise." But his words felt thin compared to the reality Sarah was facing daily. And he tried to be kind to Hagar, but he also tried not to show any favoritism. Abraham was caught between two hurting women, one wounded by emptiness, the other lifted by new purpose. He carried the weight of the promise, but also the weight of human emotion. It was not an easy burden to bear. The scriptures say that once Hagar became pregnant, she began to look down on Sarah. This didn't mean Hagar insulted her or attacked her. It meant something subtle. Her tone changed. Her posture changed. Her expressions changed. She no longer saw Sarah as superior. She began to see herself as the one chosen for motherhood, the one carrying Abraham's child. Hagar didn't fully understand Sarah's pain. She didn't understand the weight of waiting decades. She didn't understand how deeply Sarah longed for a child. She was young. She was overwhelmed. She was emotional. And yes, she became proud. This pride became the spark that would ignite a painful conflict. Sarah had spent years holding her pain inside. She hid it behind smiles. She hid it behind strength. She hid it behind the hope that someday things would change. But now, seeing Hagar walk confidently with the child Sarah dreamed of carrying, the last piece of her heart cracked. One afternoon, Sarah could no longer hold back the tears. She cried quietly, shoulders shaking, hands covering her face. She felt jealousy, though she hated admitting it, anger at the situation, not just Hagar, betrayal, even though she suggested the plan herself, confusion about where God was in all this, fear of losing Abraham's love, emptiness, deeper than she had ever known. Sarah was not a cruel woman. She was a broken woman, a hurting woman, a woman who thought she had failed. And pain that often leads to desperate reactions. Unable to hold her emotions inside anymore, Sarah went to Abraham. Her voice trembled, filled with sadness and frustration. "Abraham, I cannot bear this anymore. Hagar looks down on me. She forgets that I was the one who lifted her up. This is my suffering. God should judge between me and her." She wasn't accusing Abraham out of hatred. She was crying out from a place of deep pain. Abraham listened carefully. He saw the tears in her eyes. He heard the trembling in her voice. And he felt helpless. He couldn't undo the pregnancy. He couldn't change the decision. He couldn't erase Sarah's pain. All he could do was say softly, "Hagar is still your servant. Do what you think is best." He wasn't washing his hands of responsibility. He was giving Sarah space to protect her emotional well-being. But Sarah's next step would push Hagar into the wilderness. Sarah, overwhelmed by her emotions, began to treat Hagar more strictly. She expected more from her. She corrected her more often. She watched her with sharper eyes, not because she was cruel, but because she was hurting. Every time Hagar looked proud, Sarah felt pain. Every time Hagar touched her belly, Sarah felt a stab in her heart. Hagar felt the shift immediately. Tasks became harder. Instructions became firmer. The warmth Sarah once had toward her was replaced with coldness. Hagar felt targeted. She felt isolated. She felt trapped. Her I'd quickly turned to fear. And soon, the fear became unbearable. One morning, before the sun rose, Hagar made a decision that changed everything. She fled. She couldn't handle Sarah's harshness anymore. She couldn't stay where she felt attacked. She couldn't bear the emotional pressure. She wrapped herself in a cloak, grabbed a small jar of water, and walked away from the camp, alone, pregnant, and terrified. She didn't know where she was going. She didn't have a plan. She simply ran. The desert swallowed her footsteps. The wind covered her trail, and soon she was far from the safety she once knew. But she was not out of God's sight, not even for a moment. Hagar walked and walked, farther than she had ever gone alone. The early morning sun was gentle at first, but soon the heat began to rise, pressing against her skin and draining her strength. She felt her baby move, a small flutter inside her, a reminder she wasn't alone. But emotionally, she felt completely abandoned. She left behind the security of Abraham's household, the food she relied on, the water she needed, the community she lived among. She risked everything, all because the pain of staying felt greater than the danger of fleeing. Fear gripped her heart. She wondered if she had made a mistake, but she kept moving because returning felt impossible, and staying felt unbearable. The wilderness of Shur stretched endlessly before her, a rough and unforgiving land. The sun grew hotter, her water ran lower, her strength weakened. She sat beneath a small bush, hoping for shade that wasn't really there. Her thoughts spiraled. She whispered, "Why is this happening to me? What did I do wrong? Why do I feel so alone?" Tears blurred her vision. Her breath trembled. She wasn't just running from Sarah. She was running from a life that no longer made sense. She wondered, would she survive? Would her baby live? Would God see her? Would anyone care? The desert felt empty, but something unseen south already drawing close to her. At last, Hagar reached a small spring of water, a miracle in the midst of the desert. She fell to her knees, cupped the water in trembling hands, and drank deeply. Relief washed over her, but only for a moment. Her body found rest, but her heart remained broken. Hagar stared into the water, watching her reflection ripple. She hardly recognized herself. A young woman alone, carrying a child, hiding in the wilderness, escaping pain, searching for direction. She whispered again, weak and confused, "What am I supposed to do?" Oh, and that's when everything changed. The angel's voice was gentle but powerful. "Hagar, servant of Sarah, where have you come from, and where are you going?" Hagar swallowed hard. Her voice shook. "I'm running away from my mistress, Sarah," she said. Her words carried the weight of her pain, her fear, her desperation. The angel already knew this, but he wanted her to speak it out loud, to acknowledge her wound, to face her fear. Then he said something unexpected. "Go back to your mistress and submit to her." Those words sounded hard, but they came with a purpose. Hagar was not being sent back to punishment. She was being sent back into the plan of God. Running away meant danger. Returning meant protection. But the angel didn't stop there. He spoke a promise, a powerful promise. The angel said, "I will greatly multiply your descendants, so they will be too many to count." This was stunning. God was giving Hagar, a servant, an outsider, a runaway, a promise similar to Abraham's. Her child would become a nation. Her child would not be forgotten. Her child would have a future. And then the angel continued, "You will have a son, and you shall call his name Ishmael, because the Lord has heard your misery." The name Ishmael means, God hears. At that moment, Hagar realized something she had never known before. God had seen her. God had heard her. God had not abandoned her. Her tears flowed freely, not from sorrow, but from the shock of being noticed by the Creator of the universe. Overwhelmed, Hagar whispered a name for God, a name no one had used before. She called him El Roi, the God who sees him. A servant girl in the desert, became the first person in the Bible to give God a name. This moment was powerful, intimate, and life-changing. She realized God saw her pain, God understood her struggle, God valued her, God protected her, and God had a plan for her child. This was the beginning of Hagar's transformation. She no longer felt invisible. She no longer felt worthless. She no longer felt abandoned. She felt seen. She felt heard. She felt known. and she stood up with new strength. Hagar walked back from the wilderness with a different heart. She still carried the weight of her situation, but now she carried something far greater. A promise. God had spoken to her. He had seen her. He had heard her. She was no longer running from pain. She was walking toward purpose. With each step, the desert wind whispered a reminder. You are not alone. As the camp came into view, Hagar breathed deeply. She didn't know how Sarah would react. She didn't know how Abraham would respond. But she knew one thing. God wanted her back. So she returned, not as a defeated servant, but as a woman carrying a child of promise. Sarah was in the middle of her evening tasks when she noticed a silhouette walking toward the camp. As the figure drew closer, she recognized her. Hagar, alive, safe, and still pregnant. Sarah's emotions tangled. Relief, confusion, guilt, worry, and a quiet sting of jealousy. She wondered, why did Hagar return? Who guided her? What happened in the wilderness? But Sarah did not ask yet. She simply stepped aside, allowing Hagar to enter the camp once more. When Abraham heard the servant's whisper, Hagar has returned, he immediately went to find her. He feared the worst, that she had been harmed, that she had lost the child, that she had wandered too long in the wilderness. But when he saw her, standing strong, eyes peaceful, hand over her stomach, he felt a wave of relief wash over him. He didn't know about the angel yet. He didn't know about the promise. He didn't know that her child already had a name, Ishmael. He simply saw a woman who had survived the desert and returned to fulfill her role in the promise. That evening, when the camp grew quiet, Hagar told Abraham everything. She told him about the angel. She told him about the spring of water. She told him the name God had given her son. And she told him the promise of countless descendants. Abraham listened with deep respect. He had spoken with God before, so he understood that divine encounters change a person forever. When Hagar finished speaking, Abraham nodded slowly. He accepted her story because he recognized the presence of God in it. And from that moment on, he treated the life inside her as a true part of the divine plan. Sarah did not join their conversation, but she heard pieces of it through the tent walls. Words like angel, promise, many descendants, Ishmael. Each word struck her heart differently. Part of her felt fear. What if this child really was meant to be part of God's promise? Another part felt sadness. Why did God speak to Hagar and not to her? And another part felt frustration. She had tried to solve the problem, but instead she felt pushed farther away from the promise she longed for. Sarah turned away quietly, her heart heavier than before. She did not know what the future held, but she sensed more storms ahead. Time moved forward. Hagar's belly grew round. Her steps became slower. Her days became centered around preparing for motherhood. She smiled more often. She felt more confident. She felt chosen, not by Sarah, not by Abraham, but by God. The servants grew more respectful. Some brought her special foods. Some helped her with heavy tasks. Some asked her questions about her divine encounter. But Sarah watched silently from a distance, her emotions a mixture of love for Abraham and pain for herself. Abraham balanced everything carefully. He supported Hagar, but remained devoted to Sarah, their household just waiting for the birth of a child that would shape generations. At last, the day came. Hagar groaned through the pains of childbirth, surrounded by midwives and women from the camp. Her breaths were sharp. Her hands clutched cloth tightly. Her heart pounded with fear and anticipation. And then, a cry. A strong, healthy cry. A baby boy. Hagar held him against her chest, tears streaming down her face. She whispered the name the angel had given, Ishmael. God hears. Because God had heard her misery, and now he had given her joy. The entire household buzzed with energy. A child had been born, Abraham's first son, a piece of the promise. was now flesh and blood. Abraham entered the tent and saw his son for the first time. His face lit up with wonder. His hands trembled as he lifted the child. His smile softened as Ishmael's small fingers curled around his own. This was the child he had waited decades for. He thanked God. He blessed Hagar. He kissed Sarah's forehead, though Sarah's expression was difficult to read. Abraham loved Ishmael with a full and grateful heart. The camp celebrated with joy. Music played. Food was shared. Servants danced. Abraham had a son. But joy for one person often brings struggle for another. Sarah's heart would soon face a new test. The birth of Ishmael filled the camp with joy. But Sarah stood on the edge of the celebration. She saw the smiles. She heard the songs. She watched servants gather around Hagar, praising her strength, admiring her child. Sarah's heart ached. She remembered the joy she once imagined for herself, the dream of holding her own child, the dream of hearing her own baby's cry, the dream of feeling life move inside her. Now those dreams felt distant, like old stories whispered on the wind. Sarah wanted to feel happy for Abraham. She wanted to celebrate with the others. But each laugh she heard felt like a reminder of what she had lost. She slipped quietly into her tent, burying her face in her hands. She had created this situation, but now she felt crushed by it. Motherhood changed Hagar in ways she never expected. She cared for Ishmael tenderly, singing to him in the soft Egyptian melodies of her childhood. She held him close, protecting him from every wind gust and cold night. Her heart expanded with love, with pride, with purpose. She looked at Ishmael and remembered the angel's words, "God has heard your misery." Her child was not just a blessing. He was a symbol of God's attention, God's mercy, God's promise. And as she watched Ishmael sleep, she whispered a quiet prayer of gratitude. Abraham adored his son. He spent time with Ishmael every day, teaching him, holding him, laughing with him. When Ishmael was old enough to sit up, Abraham would sit him on his knee and speak blessings over him. He would say, "You will be strong. You will be a leader. You will be part of God's promise." Abraham felt renewed. He felt like the promise was finally becoming real. But he did not see how deeply his joy was affecting Sarah. Sarah still had authority. The camp respected her deeply, but emotionally, she felt smaller and smaller. She saw Abraham laughing with Ishmael and felt a quiet sadness settle around her heart. She saw Hagar walking with her head high and felt a sting of regret. She wondered, was this really God's plan? Had she misunderstood the promise? Had she removed herself from something meant for her? The more Ishmael grew, the more Sarah's hope shrank. She tried to stay strong. She tried to smile. She tried to pray, but her heart remained bruised. Years passed quickly. Ishmael grew into a strong, energetic boy, curious, brave, and full of life. He ran through the camp freely, climbed rocks and trees, played with the other boys, and followed Abraham everywhere. The entire household loved him. He brought joy wherever he went. Hagar watched with pride. Abraham watched with love. The servants watched with admiration. But Sarah watched with something else, a deep, aching longing. She grew older. Her hair became more silver. Her body felt weaker. Every time she saw Ishmael, she felt a mixture of love and grief. There was no open war between Sarah and Hagar. No fights, no shouting, but their hearts lived in different worlds. Hagar lived in joy, joy of motherhood, joy of being seen, joy of the promise spoken over her child. Sarah lived in sorrow, sorrow of waiting, sorrow of regret, sorrow of feeling forgotten. Abraham felt the tension, like a rope pulling at both ends. He loved Ishmael. He cherished Sarah. He tried to keep peace. But the emotional distance was growing wider than the desert surrounding them. Years of waiting had turned into decades. Sarah felt worn out. She thought, maybe God's promise was for Abraham only. Maybe he never meant to include me. She laughed bitterly at herself sometimes, wondering why she ever believed she could become a mother at her age. Her smile became rare. Her joy felt shallow. Her heart felt hollow. And every time she saw Ishmael, her longing deepened. Yet she continued to serve Abraham, continued to follow God, continued to hope just a little, even if that hope felt like a flickering flame in a storm. She did not yet know that God was preparing something miraculous, not just for Abraham and not just for Ishmael, but for her. Years had passed since Ishmael's birth, but Sarah's heart still felt empty. She loved Abraham deeply. She trusted God deeply, but she couldn't shake the feeling that she had been left out of the promise. She often sat alone in the mornings, watching the sunrise stretch over the desert, wondering why her womb had remained silent for so long. Her thoughts whispered painful questions. Why did God bless Hagar? Why not me? What did I do wrong? She didn't know that God was preparing something extraordinary, something that would change her life forever. For now, she carried her sorrow quietly, like a cloak wrapped tightly around her. Ishmael grew into a lively, talented child, quick, strong, adventurous. Abraham often taught him how to track animals, use a simple bow build, small shelters, understand the winds and stars. They laughed together, worked together, and bonded deeply. Ishmael loved his father, and Abraham loved his son. He believed Ishmael would become a great leader, just as God had promised Hagar. But the stronger Ishmael grew, the more invisible Sarah felt. Every time she heard Ishmael laugh, her heart pinched. Every time she saw Abraham teaching him, she felt a quiet sting. Abraham never meant to hurt her, but joy for one person sometimes becomes sorrow for another. Even with Ishmael growing strong and healthy, Abraham continued to seek God. He remembered the original promise, that his descendants would be more numerous than the stars. He believed God, he trusted God, but he didn't fully understand the path God was taking. One night, beneath the sky glittering with stars, Abraham prayed again. Lord, is Ishmael the one you spoke of? Is he the beginning of the promise? Guide me, show me your will. He waited for an answer, but only the soft desert wind replied. Abraham didn't know it yet, but God was preparing something so unexpected that even Sarah would laugh in disbelief. One hot afternoon, when the desert shimmered under the blazing sun, Abraham sat at the entrance of his tent, trying to cool himself in the little shade he had. Then he looked up. 3 men stood before him. They had appeared suddenly, as if the desert itself had carried them toward his tent. Abraham sensed something different about them, something divine, something holy. Without hesitation, he hurried to greet them, bowing low in respect. Please, sirs, do not pass by. Let me bring you water and food, so you may rest before continuing your journey. The 3 visitors agreed. Abraham rushed inside the tent. Abraham called to Sarah, "Hurry, prepare bread for our guests." Sarah obeyed quickly, kneading the dough with skilled hands, mixing the ingredients with precision. She did not know these were no ordinary visitors. She did not know they carried a message from God himself. She simply did her duty, as she always had. Her mind drifted to Ishmael, to her age, to her lifelong sorrow. She brushed away the thoughts, and FOC used on the bread. When the meal was ready, the 3 visitors sat under a tree near the tent. Abraham served them with honor and respect. As they ate, one of the men asked, "Where is Sarah, your wife?" Abraham replied, "She is in the tent." Then came the words that froze the air around them. The visitor said, "I will return to you next year, and Sarah, your wife, will have a son." Inside the tent, Sarah stopped breathing for a moment. Her hands trembled. Her eyes widened. Her heart raced. A son? Her? At her age, she felt laughter bubbling up, not joyful laughter, but shocked, almost bitter laughter. She whispered to herself, "After I am worn out, after my husband is old, will I now know such joy?" She didn't mean to laugh disrespectfully. It was the laughter of disbelief, the laughter of someone who had hoped too long and been disappointed too much. New York Times. But the visitors heard her. The Lord said to Abraham, "Why did Sarah laugh and say, 'Shall I really bear a child now that I am old?'" Sarah felt her heart stop. She stepped forward, frightened. "I did not laugh," she said nervously. But the Lord replied gently, "Yes, you did laugh. Not in anger, not to shame her, but to show her that He knew her heart, every wound, every fear, every secret disappointment." Then came the sentence that would echo through history. "Is anything too hard for the Lord?" Those words settled over the camp like soft rain over dry land. A promise had been spoken. A miracle had been anew and said. Sarah's life was about to change forever. After the visitors left, Sarah sat quietly for a long time. She felt a spark inside her, a small, trembling flame of hope. Could this truly happen? Could God still remember her? Could she still become a mother? She was afraid to believe too quickly. Hope had hurt her before, but she could not stop thinking about the visitors' words. She whispered softly, "Lord, if this is your promise, help me believe." She did not realize that new life was already moving toward her. Ishmael continued to grow into a strong and talented boy. He became skilled with a bow. He learned to track animals. He explored the hills and valleys around the camp. With fearless excitement, Abraham watched him with pride. He believed Ishmael was part of his future, a big part. But Ishmael had no idea that another child was coming, a child whose birth would change everything, a child who would divide the household and reshape destiny. For now, Ishmael simply enjoyed being the beloved son. He laughed freely. He lived confidential. Why? He felt secure. He did not see the storm forming on the horizon. Days passed, then weeks. Then something happened, something Sarah never expected. One morning, she woke with a strange new feeling in her body, a warmth, a heaviness, a flutter of possibility. She sat up slowly, holding her breath, hands trembling as she touched her stomach. Could it be? No, impossible. She was far too old. Her body had long since passed the age of motherhood. Yet the feeling returned, stronger, clearer, real. Sarah whispered, No, this cannot be." But deep inside, she knew something miraculous was happening. God was moving. God was fulfilling His promise. God was rewriting her story. Tears filled her eyes. Tears of shock. T-R-S of joy. Tears of disbelief. For decades she had waited. Now the impossible had begun. When Abraham returned from tending his flocks, Sarah walked toward him slowly. He noticed something different in her eyes, a light he had not seen in many years. She reached for his hands, her voice shaking. "Abraham, I think it has begun." Abraham frowned with confusion. "What has begun?" Sarah placed his hand gently on her stomach. Abraham froze. His eyes widened. His breath caught. A stunned silence fell between them. Could it be? After all these years? After all the waiting? After all the tears? Abraham's knees grew weak. He pulled Sarah into his arms, his voice breaking with emotion. "Sarah, God has remembered you." They held each other as the sun set behind them, painting the desert gold. Hope had returned. Life had begun. The promise was unfolding. Hagar noticed changes quickly. Sarah walked differently, lighter, brighter, more alive. Servants whispered among themselves. Smiles spread through the camp. Hagar felt a knot tighten in her stomach. She sensed something she never expected, something that frightened her. Sarah was changing. Sarah was smiling. Sarah was glowing with joy. Sarah seemed renewed. Hagar wondered, could she be? But she didn't want to believe it. If Sarah was truly pregnant, everything Hagar held above her would disappear. Her position, her confidence, her pride. Fear began to grow where pride once lived. Word spread quickly. People began to whisper, "Did you see Sarah this morning? She looks different. She seems so happy. Is it possible after all these years?" Hope filled the camp. For so long, they had watched Sarah struggle with sorrow. Now they saw her eyes shine again. Even those who had grown used to the idea that Ishmael was Abraham's only heir began to wonder, is God doing something new? Abraham walked through the camp with a quiet smile, unable to hide his joy. But Hagar's heart grew heavier with every whisper. Ishmael felt the change too. He saw Abraham spending more time near Sarah's tent. He saw the smiles exchanged between them. He saw servants carrying special foods to Sarah. Ishmael was still just a boy, but he understood enough to sense that something big was happening. He tugged on Abraham's sleeve one evening and asked, "Father, why is everyone acting different?" Abraham smiled gently and placed a hand on his son's head. "You will understand soon, Ishmael." But Ishmael already sensed it. His place as the only child was slipping away. Weeks later, Sarah felt something she had always dreamed of. A small movement, a tiny kick. Her heart soared. She gasped, covering her mouth as tears streamed down her cheeks. She whispered, thank you, Lord. I feel him." She called Abraham, who rushed inside with excitement shining in his eyes. Together, they felt the life growing inside her, a miracle they once believed impossible. Sarah laughed, this time with pure joy. She said, "God has made me laugh, and everyone who hears of this will laugh with me." For the first time in decades, her laughter was not bitter, but beautiful. When the time finally came, Sarah gave birth to a baby boy. The whole camp held its breath. And then, a cry, a new life, a miracle, a child born not by human strategy, not by desperate planning, but by God's direct promise. They named him Isaac, which means, he laughs. Abraham cried tears of joy as he held his son for the first time. Sarah whispered, "Who would have thought that I would nurse a child?" It was a moment of pure wonder, a promise fulfilled, a hope restored, a miracle witnessed. But for Hagar and Ishmael, everything had now changed. Ishmael watched the celebration quietly. He was older now, not a small child, but a growing boy. He didn't fully understand why everyone was so captivated by this little baby. He felt replaced, even if no one said it out loud. He wondered, does Father love him more than me? Hagar watched her son, worry filling her heart. She knew change was coming, and she feared what it would bring. Isaac grew quickly, a bright-eyed, joyful child. His laughter filled the camp, like warm sunlight bathing cold ground. Sarah adored him. Abraham treasured him. Servants smiled whenever he toddled past. The promise God made to Abraham and Sarah was now alive, walking, laughing, growing. But each new milestone Isaac reached created a deeper divide between him and Ishmael. Ishmael, once the center of attention, now felt pushed to the side. He didn't understand. He didn't know why everything felt different. He didn't know why people looked at Isaac with a kind of wonder they had never shown him. He tried to be strong. He tried to ignore the sting. But jealousy and confusion began to bloom in his young heart, and Hagar felt it all. Abraham loved Ishmael deeply. That never changed. He taught him skills, spent time with him, and still blessed him as his son. But now he also carried Isaac in his arms, played with him, and watched Sarah care for him with glowing joy. Abraham's heart stretched in two directions, toward Ishmael, the son he had waited years for, the boy who carried his strength; toward Isaac, the miracle child of promise, the boy who carried God's future covenant. Abraham tried to give both of them love, but even a loving father cannot stop jealousy between two growing boys. And as Isaac Gr. stronger. The balance became harder to maintain. For the first time in her life, Sarah felt seen, not as barren, not as forgotten, not as broken, but as a mother. Her joy was great. Her confidence returned. Her heart felt full. Yet that joy brought something else, a sharpened awareness of Hagar and Ishmael. Sarah had once feared being replaced by Hagar. Now she feared Isaac being overshadowed by Ishmael. It was not hatred. It was a mother's instinct to protect the miracle she had waited nearly a century to hold. Even so, the simmering tension between the two women began to rise again. Ishmael reached his teenage years, strong, talented, full of potential. But he also carried new emotions: jealousy, confusion, frustration, pride. He knew he was Abraham's firstborn. He knew he was strong. He knew God had promised to make him a great nation. But he also saw Isaac receiving special attention he once had. Ishmael felt a storm brewing inside him. He didn't mean to cause trouble, but emotions he didn't understand began to influence his actions. He loved his father. He respected him. But he struggled with the feeling that his place in the household was shrinking. When Isaac was finally weaned, Abraham held a great feast, a celebration of Isaac's growth and Sarah's joy. The camp buzzed with excitement. Music, laughter, roasted meals, blessings spoken aloud. It was a beautiful day. Everyone seemed happy, except Ishmael. He watched from a distance, feeling the celebration push him even further out of the center of attention. Hagar felt the shift too. Her heart tightened with worry. She saw a shadow in Ishmael's eyes, the shadow of resentment. And soon that shadow would break everything open. This moment changed the entire future. During the feast, Isaac wandered away from the main crowd to play in the sand. Ishmael followed. At first, it seemed innocent. But then Ishmael began to laugh. Not a playful laugh, but a mocking one. Maybe he teased Isaac. Maybe he pushed him. Maybe he made fun of him. The scriptures do not detail every word, but they tell us the meaning clearly. Ishmael mocked Isaac. He belittled him. He treated him with contempt. To Ishmael, it may have been a moment of teenage frustration. To Sarah, it was a threat, a clear sign that Ishmael would not respect Isaac's place as the promised child. Sarah's heart flared with fear and anger. This was not just childish behavior. This was a challenge to the promise God made, to the future of her son, to the destiny God had spoken over Isaac. And Sarah reacted. Like any mother protecting her child, Sarah went straight to Abraham. Her voice was strong, stronger than Abraham had ever heard it. "Send this servant woman away, and her son with her," she said firmly, "for the son of this servant will not share in the inheritance with my son Isaac." Abraham felt his heart drop. Send Ishmael away? His firstborn? His boy? The son he loved? He was torn apart inside. He wanted peace. He wanted both sons in his life. He wanted harmony. But Sarah's eyes showed a mother's truth. She would not allow Isaac's future to be threatened by Ishmael's attitude. Abraham said nothing. At first, he simply stood there, broken, confused, wounded. He loved Sarah. He loved Ishmael. How could he choose? That night, Abraham went out into the darkness and cried out to God. He prayed for Ishmael. He prayed for Hagar. He prayed for wisdom. His prayer was raw and filled with pain. He pleaded, "Lord, what am I to do? Must I send away my own son? How can I bear this?" Abraham did not want division. He did not want to break his family. He did not want to wound either woman. He was a man caught between love and destiny. He needed God to speak. And God did. Abraham's heart was hurting. He loved Isaac, but he also loved Ishmael deeply. The idea of sending Ishmael away felt like tearing out a piece of his soul. But God heard Abraham's cry, and God answered. In a gentle but firm voice, God spoke, "Do not be distressed, because of the boy, and because of your servant." Abraham felt his breath catch. God continued, "Listen to Sarah, for through Isaac your descendants shall be named." This meant Isaac was the child of the covenant, the promise God had planned all along. But God did not forget Ishmael. God did not reject him. God did not remove his love from him. Instead, God said, "But I will also make the son of the servant into a nation, because he is your offspring." Abraham closed his eyes, tears falling down his face. God was not removing Ishmael from his plan. He was giving Ishmael a different destiny, a destiny that would also become great. This brought Abraham comfort, but not enough to erase the pain of what he had to do next. Abraham stayed awake most of the night. He remembered Ishmael's first steps, Ishmael's laughter, Ishmael's hand gripping his own, Ishmael running across the camp, Ishmael looking up at him with admiration. He remembered teaching Ishmael how to shoot a bow, how to track animals, how to understand the stars. He remembered whispering blessings over Ishmael, promising him that God would shape his future. Now he had to send him away, not because Abraham wanted it, but because God had chosen a different path for each of his sons. Abraham wiped his tears and prepared himself for the most painful moment of his life. Before the rest of the camp awoke, Abraham went to Hagar's tent. Hagar stepped outside, surprised. Ishmael, now a teenager, stood beside her. Abraham's face was heavy with sorrow. He held a small pack of bread and a skin filled with water. His hands shook as he gave them to her. Hagar's eyes widened in confusion. Her heart pounded. "Abraham, what is this? Why are you giving me these things?" Abraham swallowed hard. His voice cracked. "Hagar, you must go." The words broke something inside her. Go? Where? Why? Abraham couldn't meet her eyes. "It is what God has said, and he will be with you. He will make Ishmael a great nation." Ishmael looked at his father with shock and betrayal. "Father, please." But Abraham could not speak another word. His heart was breaking. He pulled Ishmael into a tight embrace, holding him long and hard. As tears fell onto Ishmael's shoulder, "I love you, my son." Abraham whispered, "I always will." Then he lew. Tigo. It was the hardest thing Abraham had ever done. Hagar held Ishmael's hand and walked away from the camp that had been their home for so many years. Each step was heavy. Each breath was painful. Behind her, the tents of Abraham's camp grew smaller and smaller until they blended into the horizon. She turned once, just once, and saw Abraham standing far away, watching them with a broken heart. But Ishmael did not look back. His pain was too sharp, his anger too strong, his confusion too deep. They entered the wilderness with only a little food and a small amount of water, but they also carried something else. Ishmael carried a promise. Hagar carried a memory, and God carried both of them in his sight. The wilderness of Beersheba was even harsher than the wilderness of Shur, where Hagar had once fled before. The sun beat down mercilessly. The water supply grew smaller each hour. Hagar felt her strength weakening. Ishmael grew silent, no longer angry, just tired. They walked for hours, then stopped to rest, then walked again. The desert gave them nothing. No shade, no fruit, no water, no direction. Hagar prayed quietly, hoping someone would hear. In God had not forgotten her. But the desert wind answered her with silence. At last the moment came that Hagar feared most. She lifted the water skin to give Ishmael a drink. Not a drop came out. Her heart dropped into her stomach. Her hands shook. Her breath quickened. They were alone in the desert with no water and no hope. Ishmael grew faint. His steps faltered. His strength faded. He was no longer the strong, confident boy who ran across Abraham's camp. He was a thirsty, exhausted child on the edge of collapse. Hagar's panic grew. Finally, Ishmael couldn't walk anymore. Hagar helped him lie under a thin desert shrub, the only shade they could find. Ishmael closed his eyes, his breathing shallow. Hagar wiped sweat from his face, her tears mixing with the dust on his cheeks. "Please, Ishmael, stay with me. Don't leave me." But Ishmael was too weak to respond. Hagar's heart shattered. She remembered the angel's promise, but now she feared that the desert would take her son's life before the promise could ever come true. Hagar could not bear to watch her son suffer. She took a few weak steps away and fell to her knees. She covered her face and sobbed into the sand. She cried out, "I cannot watch the boy die." Her tears fell like rain onto the hot desert ground. She felt alone, helpless, abandoned. But this time, just like before, God saw her, and God heard the voice of her son. Hagar sobbed with her face in her hands, her heart breaking for her son. She thought she was alone. She thought no one saw her. She thought no one heard her. But she was wrong, because God heard the voice of Ishmael, not the voice of a stranger, not the voice of someone forgotten, but the voice of a boy who carried a promise. Suddenly, a calmness swept across the desert. Not a wind, not a storm, but a gentle stillness that felt different from anything Hagar had known. A familiar presence returned to her life. Then she heard it, a voice that carried peace, a voice that carried authority, a voice that knew her name, Hagar. Her breath caught, her tears stopped mid-fall, her heart froze in awe. It was the voice she heard years ago at the spring of water. The angel of God said, "What is troubling you, Hagar? Do not be afraid." Not anger, not judgment, only comfort. The voice continued, "God has heard the boy where he is." Hagar felt her strength returning, like someone gently lifting her chin and reminding her that she mattered. The angel spoke again, "Get up, take the boy by the hand, for I will make him a great nation." These words broke through Hagar's fear. A great nation? That meant Ishmael would live. That meant Ishmael had a future. That meant the promise was still alive. Hagar wiped her tears and rose slowly to her feet. She turned toward her son, no longer filled with despair, but with "You found strength." Then something miraculous happened. God opened Hagar's eyes, not in a magical, dramatic way, but in a simple, powerful one. Right in front of her, only a short distance away, was a well, a clear, life-giving well, full of water. She hadn't seen it before. Her tears, her fear, her exhaustion had blinded her, but now her vision cleared. She gasped softly, her heart filling with gratitude. Water, life, hope, the very thing she needed most, was right before her. Hagar rushed to the well, filled the water skin with trembling hands, and hurried back to Ishmael. She knelt beside him, lifting his head gently. "Ishmael, drink, my son." He sipped the water, then a little more, and gradually his strength returned. His eyes opened. He looked at his mother, and she smiled through tears. Not tears of despair, but tears of relief. God had not abandoned them. He had seen them. He had heard them. He had provided for them. From that day forward, Hagar and Ishmael lived in the wilderness, not as lost wanderers, but as people under God's protection. The Bible says, God was with the boy as he grew. Ishmael became strong, skilled, confident, resilient. He learned to use a bow. He became a skilled hunter. He adapted to the wilderness with courage and determination. Ishmael was not weak. He was not forgotten. He as not abandoned. He was God's promise in motion. As Ishmael grew older, Hagar found him a wife from her homeland, Egypt. She wanted him to have a family. She wanted him to be surrounded by people who understood their heritage. This marked the beginning of Ishmael's legacy, a legacy that would become tribes, nations, generations, leaders. The desert that once threatened his life became the land where he built his future. Meanwhile, back at Abraham's camp, Isaac continued to grow. He was the promised child, the one through whom God would establish his covenant. But the story of Hagar and Ishmael remained forever connected to Abraham's life. Hagar had met God twice. Ishmael had been rescued by God. Both were blessed. Both were part of the promise, but in different ways. Time moved forward, as time always does. Ishmael grew into a strong young man, tough, determined, shaped by the wilderness. Isaac grew into a gentle, thoughtful boy, raised in the comfort of Abraham's camp, nurtured by Sarah's love. They lived in two different worlds, one in the harsh beauty of the desert, one in the promise-filled land of Abraham. But both carried the blood of their father. Both i.e., the legacy of faith. Both carried promises spoken by God himself. In the wilderness, Ishmael became everything God promised. Strong, resourceful, fearless. He knew how to track animals, find water, navigate the stars, survive in harsh conditions, hunt with incredible accuracy. His bow became an extension of his arm. His skill became legendary among desert people. Travelers who passed by spoke in awe of the young hunter, who moved like the wind and struck with the precision of a hawk. Ishmael earned respect early, not because of his father, but because of who he became. Hagar's heart healed over time. The memory of being cast out hurt, but watching Ishmael grow strong filled her with quiet joy. She remembered her tears in the desert. She remembered the voice of God. She remembered the well that saved them. Now she saw the promise fulfilled. Not all of it yet, but the beginning of something great. She often whispered, El Roy, the God who sees me. Because she knew God had watched over her every step that as Ishmael matured. People began to gather around him. His strength and leadership and skill made him a natural guide. Desert tribes began to follow him. Families joined his group. Young men looked up to him. He spoke with confidence. He acted with courage. He led with instinct. The promise God had spoken was unfolding. I will make him into a great nation. It was happening before Hagar's eyes. Isaac and Ishmael never grew up together again. Their childhoods remained separate, one in the comfort of a promised land, the other in the wild strength of the desert. But their destinies remained forever tied through Abraham. Ishmael would become the father of many nations. Isaac would become the line through which God's covenant would continue. One son would build Rebes. The other would build a legacy of faith. Different purposes, different futures, both seen by God. Abraham lived long enough to see the promises of God take shape before his eyes. He saw Sarah become a joyful mother, even in her old age. He saw Isaac grow into a wise young man with a gentle heart. He occasionally heard news from the wilderness, reports of Ishmael leading a growing people, living strong and prosperous. And Abraham thanked God for both of his sons. His life was not perfect. His family had faced attack. His choices had brought both joy and pain. But through it all, God had remained faithful. And Abraham knew it. From the quiet tents of Abraham to the harsh wilderness of Beersheba, from the tears of Sarah to the cries of baby Isaac, from Hagar's desperate escape to Ishmael's rise as a mighty leader. This story is not just about two women, or two boys, or two families. It is about God seeing the unseen, God hearing the unheard, and God fulfilling promises in ways humans could never imagine.